Here's my second story for Storytelling Cafe tonight. This story is an Inuit story. It comes from the far north. It's called Skeleton Woman. Once there was a woman who had offended her father so badly that he took her to the top of the cliffs and he threw her down. No one anymore remembers what words were spoken, what deeds were done, only that he threw her down off the cliff, down through the wild white air, down through the wild white water, down through the green glassy water, down through the deep dark water, till she came to rest on the sand and the stones of the seabed. And there she lay, and the movement of the water currents and the grinding of the sand grains against her and the nibbling of the fishes and the crabs, they stripped the flesh from her bones until all that was left, lying on the cold sea bed, were the long white bones of a skeleton woman. And people avoided the water in the lee of those cliffs. They didn't fish there. Time passed and people couldn't remember what had happened, but they avoided that part. When they went out in kayaks, they went the other way. The people round there, they knew that place wasn't right. And then one day, a stranger came, paddling his kayak along the coast, hunting, fishing, trapping as he went. And as he came round the cliff into the lee of the bay, he thought to himself, here's a good place to fish. So he baited his line and he let it down over the side of the kayak, down through the wild white water, down through the green glassy water, down through the deep dark water, till the hook on the end of his line was scraping this way and that on the cold sea bed. And with the movement of the deep sea currents, that hook caught under the rib cage of the skeleton woman. And up above in his boat, the hunter, he felt a pull on his line. He thought. He began to draw in his line back into the boat. And as he pulled the line came up, the hook came up, and the hook was under the rib cage of the skeleton woman. And whether she would or whether she would not, she was lifted up out of her cold seabed and drawn up through the water. And the weight on his line excited the hunter. He thought, wonder what I've caught. But the last thing he was expecting to see breaking through the water was the white dome of a human skull, the seawater pouring out of the eye holes through the gaping mouth. And what he did not expect was that 10 bony fingers would hook onto the side of his boat. He was terrified. He dropped his line into the boat, scrambled as far away as he could, then grabbed his paddle and began to head for the shore as fast as he could. But his line was in the bottom of the boat, and the hook was on the line and the hook were hooked under the rib cage of the skeleton woman. So as he paddled for home, he drew her behind him, and when he looked over his shoulder fearfully, like some crazy water skier, that skeleton was creaming through the waves, the wake trailing behind her, and she was coming fast behind him, and he paddled faster to get away, but the faster he went, the faster she went, because his line was on the hook, and the hook was under her rib cage. Well, he reached the shore, he scrambled up, tugging his boat away from the tide line, and then he grabbed up his line, his livelihood, and he began to run away. But as he ran, the line with the hook dragged the skeleton behind him, clattering over the stones of the beach, and he ran and ran up to where he'd got his little hut, his trapper hut, and he ran inside and he drew down the skin over the entrance and he flung himself down on the floor, the earthen floor, and he gasped from his run. And gradually his breathing calmed, his heart slowed down, his eyes got used to the dim light inside the skin-covered little shelter, and his eyes got used to the light, he saw between him and the doorway the tangled heap of the white bones of the skeleton woman which he had dragged behind him. And again his breath began to rush, his heart began to race, but it didn't move. Nothing happened. And then he saw how his line was tangled around the bones, and rather timidly he untangled it, coiled it, put it away tidily, and then something about the untidy pile of the bones didn't quite please him, and he reached out and he began to order them, the way an adult might play with a child's toys left abandoned on the floor. He straightened the leg bones, arranged the little bones of the feet, turned the pelvis which was twisted and set out the rib cage, straightened the shoulders and reached out the arm bones on each side, set the skull straight at the top of the bones of the spine, and then when she lay there so neat and so still, somehow didn't seem so frightening anymore. And so tired from the race and the panic was he that he unfolded the furs of his sleeping place, drew them up over his shoulders, closed his eyes and fell asleep. And he lay there so still, and she lay there so still, watching him from the great empty sockets of her eyes. And then, very slowly, the skeleton woman sat up and leaned forward to watch this human as he slept. And he must have dreamed, because in his sleep a tear trickled from under his closed lids and ran down towards his beard. And when she saw that, a great thirst was wakened in her, and she reached out and she touched gently one of those bony fingers to that tear, and she brought it to her lipless mouth, and she drank. And it gave her the strength to lean over and draw back the furs that covered him, and then gently as you unfasten the buttons on your lover's shirt, she opened his chest, and she reached inside, and she drew out the great red beating globe of his heart, and she held it in her hand, ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. And the life force in it called to her, and she began to beat a rhythm on that heart, matching the rhythm of the heartbeat as if the heart were a drum. And as she drummed on the heart, she drummed back the flesh onto her body. She drummed back the tendons and ligaments to knit her bones together. She drummed back the muscles to raise them and move them. She drummed back the organs into the cavity of her chest and her pelvis. She drummed back the eyes into the sockets, the ears to her head, her lips to her mouth, the tongue behind those white teeth. She drummed back her eyebrows, her eyelashes, the hair of her head, and the hair of her body, not too much, and in all the right places. And when she had drummed back her skin, her flesh, her body, she set her own heart into her rib cage and set it beating in time with the heart that she held in her hand. And when she had drummed back the blood to pumping round her body, well, she leaned forward and gently, so as not to disturb him, she put the heart back into the hunter's chest, and as kindly as you draw the covers over your lover's shoulders on a cold night, she closed back his skin, and then she lifted up the furs of the sleeping place, got him beside him, and pulled them up over them both. And when they woke in the morning, She was looking into the warm brown eyes of the hunter, and he was looking into the emerald green, sea green eyes of the woman, and they both knew that they would never have to be lonely again.